Good afternoon, everyone. I neglected, as you were reading the bio, I neglected to mention that I'm also a graduate of Elon. So thank you. I graduated from Elon in 2017, and so we are, I was thinking the other day about just the context that you kind of get from being out of school. And when you reflect on your time in college, you have a greater appreciation for it. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, so I'm going to just jump right in. I'm not going to talk at you for the entire time that I've been allotted. My hope is that we can kind of run through the talk, and then I can hear from you all, right? If you have any questions or things that you'd like to talk about. So with that, let's just get started. So I always like to begin with some definitions, right? What are we going to be kind of talking about? What are we here for today? And so my understanding is that your sub-themes for today are revive, reclaim, and rejoice. So the working definitions we will be using today for the sake of the conversation are revive, which means to restore to life or consciousness. To reclaim is to retrieve or recover, typically something previously lost or given. And then lastly, rejoice, which is to feel or show great joy or delight. You don't have to memorize that, but that's just what we're doing, okay? So this is me, right? And I had to start off by throwing a little cuteness on the because this picture I think was taken. I took this picture maybe a couple months ago. I was going through some things, kind of throwing some stuff out, and I found this picture, and I'm like, gosh, I look really cute. But also, it reminded me of just time and the fact that, you know, I'm 28 years old. That picture was taken when I was 3 or 4 years old. And just the amount of knowledge, the amount of wisdom, if you can use that, when you kind of live, and I know that I'm still relatively young, but I just kind of started reflecting on the fact that although I'm only 28 years old, I've been through some things. And I've been able to experience a lot. And so just like all of you who are now, for the most part, sort of in your college career, you should be at this point, I think, taking some time to reflect every once in a while on where you've been. I really do believe that in order to know where you're going, you need to understand where you've been. So this is me in high school. This is actually my freshman year of high school. You see the braces. I was one of those students who was an overachiever. I did everything. I had really good grades. I was president of everything. I was president of my freshman, sophomore, junior class. In my senior year, I was student body president. I think I was also homecoming king. So, you know, when you really think about, you know, I want to contextualize for you kind of who I was as a person in high school. When I think about it now, a lot of the activities and the things that I did in high school were really driven by what I felt like I was supposed to do, not necessarily what I wanted to do. I think one of the things that my teachers always said to my mother in parent-teacher conferences was if he could just focus, he would be like the best student ever. But he's always focused on student government when he needs to be focused on his grades, right? That was always the feedback. And that continued as I matriculated to school. I went back and looked at some of my Facebook posts. I didn't even know you could do this, but I actually found out about Elon literally, what's the date? January 2nd of 2012. The start of my first year was that fall. My mother actually said, I'd like to take you to this school. It's called Elon. And I said, where is that? And she said, Burlington. I was like, But I was like, okay, let's go. And I took a tour here and I was flabbergasted. I was in the International Baccalaureate program at my high school, and my high school was literally 80% students of color. But because of that, we had a partnership with Wake Forest. And so I knew what I wanted from my undergraduate institution was a similar institution to Wake, but I didn't want Wake. Mostly because it was in Winston-Salem where I live, and I was like, I don't want to stay in Winston-Salem for my college career. What I loved about Elon was Elon was always growing. There was this innate commitment to continuous improvement that I could even recognize as a high school senior. And I was like, I want to be here. And so I applied, thankfully got in. And then I remember having a tough conversation. It actually ended up being, most people don't know this because these two schools are actually very different. It ended up being between Elon University and Winston-Salem State. And the reason why is because my mother went to Winston-Salem State. I sang at the time, and the choir there was amazing. And I was like, I want to sing on the Winston-Salem State choir. But my mother was like, you want to go to Elon, don't you? I was like, yes. And there was a really big difference in cost. And my mom and I kind of had the conversation, and she was like, I think this is where you need to be. So we're going to work to just make it work. And we did. And I remember going through the process after I got admitted of trying to pick housing and do all these things. And I remember going on the website. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a big researcher. I'm always find who reports to whom. I love a good org chart. I'm going to figure out. And so I found out where I wanted to live and where I didn't. And I decided that I saw that Smith was an option, and I was like, yep, that's not for me. And what I did was I applied for a living learning community, which at the time was the International Living Learning Community, which was housed in the Isabella Cannon Pavilion, right? It was amazing. If you think about it, and most of you don't know this, but in the higher ed space, most of the time, historically, the dorms we have residence halls here. We don't have dorms, but the residence halls for first-year students don't tend to be the best. But here, they are immaculate. And so my first year was off to a really fantastic start because I was able to stay in the Isabella Cannon Pavilion in the International Living Learning Community. Now this picture here, there's a lot going on here. I went back because I was looking at like dates, and first I was like, where did this come from? What is this picture? So a part of the living learning community, one of the things that we did was we traveled, not anywhere extensive, but we went to Asheville. And it was like raining, but it was raining and it was cold. It was like a lot. You could just tell there was a lot going on. But that poncho I still have it, it's lovely. But the reason why I included this picture is because, that was really my first opportunity where I was able to take a trip with a group of people who were different than me, and we had a great time. I can remember that trip very vividly. And my time within the living learning community was, very well spent. I had a fantastic time there. One of the things that I also decided I wanted to do, and this was before I kind of figured out, okay, you need to kind of focus on what you want to do and not what, you probably should do, is I decided I want to run for freshman class president. And what's embarrassing is that this video is still available on the YouTube. I'm a much better speaker now than I was then. But I decided I wanted to run for class president and, went through that process and ultimately was successful. And I was freshman class president here. And then right out of the bat, literally, I think I got elected in September. In November, we were talking about whether or not Chick-fil-A should stay on campus. It was like a big thing. I got all kinds of Facebook messages from people who were angry. We had a big meeting here in McKinnon, like all three of the sections were kind of taken out. People literally showed up to my residence hall and they were like, I want to talk to Alex because you need to vote this way, right? Dr. Book, you remember that. It was an interesting time to be a first-year student because while I was on SGA to really do good work, I kind of felt like some of the things that I heard during that whole issue really caused me to start to think about, whether or not I was in the right place, right? Whether or not I was, really where I was meant to be. But by sophomore year, I was just tired. And this is actually me during move-in day of 2013. I was an RA, and so so those of you who are RAs, move-in day is really difficult. And I was in Danley, and which I know, And one of the things that I really thought about at the time, I came here and I still was the same hyperly involved. I was an RA. I was at that point sophomore class president. I worked in student conduct. I worked in the creed. I was doing everything. And it really got to a place where I started to say, okay, well, and really, I'm not even going to take credit for that. Sometimes life has a way of communicating to you that you need to slow down and you need to do something different. And so what ended up happening was after I kind of took that year, I hit some really tough walls. And I also wanted to study abroad. And I really felt like at that point, I was going to use that time away to really reflect on what my purpose was, what I wanted to spend the rest of my time in Elon doing. This picture is actually from the airport. My mom was like, "You look so cute." And I was like, "No, this is my airport outfit. Don't take a picture of me." But we were actually in Washington, D.C., taking the connecting flight to New York because I left out of New York. And really, to be honest with you, that whole thing was crazy. I lost my passport, and I ended up barely making the flight, and I had never been out of the country before, but by the end of it, everything worked out okay. And I spent 4 months that are literally one of the highlights of my life. I spent 4 months in London. It was immaculate, not just the experience itself, but the impact it had on my life, my priorities, my desire to, really make a good contribution to the institution. And one of the things that because I'm just as a reminder, I quit being class president before I left to study abroad. And a part of that decision was because I said, I really don't think that I'm in the best place to really function in that role anymore. I kind of took a reset. Which I think sometimes we all should not be afraid to do. So this picture is in one of the best backyards I've ever been in ever, Buckingham Palace. And the grass was immaculate. And one of the things that I think was really interesting about being in London is the city itself is super old, right? By comparison to anything in the United States, it just was completely different. And actually something that's a little bit of a different experience than most of my colleagues, I actually, for some reason, was placed in a different housing location than the rest of the Elon students. So I had roommates who were from the University of Florida. I didn't know anybody. And the only time I saw Elon students was during class. And at first, I thought that was the worst thing ever because I was alone. I, felt bad about that. But at the end, I was like, it couldn't have been better. Because, when you're put in an environment like that, you are almost forced to really push yourself and your boundaries and to develop relationships. And that's a key skill that you're going to need for the rest of your life. And I developed that skill by being able to interact with students, colleagues, peers who were different than I am. So I came back. I was even more tired, right? That's the theme, we're tired. But I think that when I came back in the spring of 2015, it seemed like to me a lot was going on campus, right? We had a student who was called the N-word by a passerby. People would drive by and just say the N-word. We had lots of incidents of bias. The institution was responding to kind of, what do we do, right? And I keenly remember having a conversation where I served on at that time, it was the Black Cultural Society Executive Board. And there was actually an incident where in Colonnades, where two students who were roommates had a whiteboard on the outside of their room. And someone drew a swastika on the board and then also drew KKK on the board. A Black identified student and a Jewish identified student were the occupants of that room. In response, which I appreciate in hindsight, university leaders went and met with leadership groups of those students. So at the time, we were asked to have a meeting with Smith Jackson, who was our VP of Student Life at the time, Dr. Brooke Barnett. There were some other people who were present, and they really asked us kind of like, what is it that we need? They were really responsive to our needs. And I actually remember having this conversation because it was a little bit baffling. BCS as a student organization was not that active, but because it had been previously, that's why the institution kind of reached out. But amongst black students were like, why did they meet with y'all? I don't even remember the last event y'all had. Why did they meet with BCS? And that really caused me to kind of think, well, we can't presume to speak on behalf of a population that we have not been actively engaged with. And at that time, the perception was so bad, I was like, we need to do a reset. And so what ended up happening was I started, because I was in the position of vice president, BCS historically had a fashion show that was put on for years, and I was tasked with putting that on again. But I wanted to change it. I wanted it to be big. Like, I wanted it to be huge. And Sylvia's laughing because she remembers everybody was like, what's going on? This is a picture from rehearsal. And most of these students, you can see Simone. Simone is actually right there. Simone was a participant in one of the fashion shows, and she was brilliant. It really presented an opportunity for students to be able to be engaged, do something fun, but also elevating the profile of BCS. And we accomplished that, but that wasn't enough. And I think this is a picture of the entire group. I just wanted to make sure that I include everybody, because some of these people who participated in the fashion show have gone on to do excellent, fantastic things. Some of them are lawyers, some of them are in medical school, some of them are, some of them work here. I think that one of the things that I wanted to do with that is to get students to try something new, and to also communicate that BCS as an organization is vibrant, is connected, is doing better to represent the institution and black students as a whole. And so also, based on those incidences of bias, this is actually an institution picture that was taken, and I was like, gosh, I needed a haircut. But we had a rally here. It actually was out on the front steps of here in Mosley. That was really just a statement. We did a walk, and then we came back, and a few students spoke, and I was one of those students. We spoke out against these incidences of bias and racism in general, and that was student organized, which is extremely important. We really tried our best to make sure that we were validating the lived experiences of students. It's important that black students aren't the only people advocating for themselves. And one of the things that we try to do with that is to be inclusive and to invite other voices to the table, right? Because it's extremely important to do that. A rising tide lifts all boats when it comes to eradicating oppression. It can't be done in sort of isolated vacuums. So additionally, and Dr. Williams, I'm looking over there at you, there was a small group of black identified students. Dr. Williams, I'm gonna shout Dr. Williams out really quickly. He arrived at the institution. Elon loves a good title. You had about 3. It was Presidential Fellow, Special Assistant to the President, and Dean of Multicultural Affairs. Wasn't that it? I think that's what it was. And so it has shifted over time, but he was instrumental in really getting a group of us together, which all of these students here, this was in 2015, all of these students are seniors except for 2 of us, myself, and then one of my closest friends, Cassidy, who is over there on my right, everybody's right, yeah, the right-hand side. We got together, we met and had those meetings were long. I think one night it started snowing. We were like, I got to go. We got together and prepared a document to partner with senior leadership of the institution to really identify some concrete things that can be done to advance the black student experience on campus. One of the things I want to tell you, and I don't want to sound like the alumni who has kind of been there, done that. Because when I was a student, I always hated that. I hated when alumni would come and say, what you're experiencing isn't that bad, so just kind of get over it. But what I'm telling you is context is everything. And in the real world, and I will never forget this, a a person who, Dr. Brooke Barnett told me this, and at the time I was like, all right. She said, when you get in the real world, just understand that like the supports that are in place and the ability for you to advance change and advance the institution you work for is not gonna look like it is here. When you have a job, they want you to do your job. They don't want you to do anything else but your job. And so as students, particularly that you attend a student-centered institution, because every four-year institution is not student-centered, you have the ability to impact your institution. And that is something to not take for granted. We were able to meet with senior staff a lot over the course of that time period. I think we had like 4 or 5 sit-downs with senior staff. They did not have to do that, right? And so in kind, what we had to do was make sure that we were educating ourselves, that the things we asked for had good timelines, that they were reasonable, right? And that we were lining up our recommendations with sort of the plan for the institution and really educating ourselves on what is currently in place now. Anytime you want to affect change, it is your responsibility to ensure that you are doing your homework. Also, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. We had an assistant director of the CREED at the time. Her name was Jamie Butler, and she was BSU. She was BCS/BSU. She was our advisor. And I went to her because I was going to be president. I said, in order to do this rebrand, I need time during the summer to be able to get that done. And I can't do it for free because the impact of this organization is going to, I hope, have lasting impact on the institution. And so that's going to take time to rewrite constitutions, to look at our org structure. And so she was able to hire me on within the CREED for a limited amount of hours during the summer so that I could work on our org structure and create what you know now as BSU. This is the first executive board for BSU, which is comprised of students from a variety of backgrounds. I tried my best to be as intentional as possible. Some people wanted positions, some people had to be voluntold. And one of the reasons why is because I had to get buy-in, right? For any long-lasting institutional change, you can't drag people with you. You can't drag people on board. You have to be able to address concerns. You have to be able to, the ideal position is to have people walk with you as opposed to dragging people along, right? And sometimes that takes longer than what we would like, but at the end of the day, the end result is fantastic because you don't have to worry about all of the different other issues. And I wanted MPHC at the table. I wanted all of the other Black organizations at the table because it was important that they understood that the purpose of BSU is not to tell other organizations what to do. It is to be a catalyst for advancing the Black student experience on campus. And so this group, some of these people, well, really all of them, I still kind of keep in contact with, but we had a really fantastic year that year. We also, so actually Simone took this, so that's Simone's hoverboard, right? Yeah. We had what we called town halls once a month where students could come and we had discussions, and President Lambert at the time attended one, and he saw Simone on her hoverboard, which was all the rage at the time, and he tried it out, and students were amazed. And I was too. I was like, because I wasn't gonna get on one myself. But it was really great to see, and I think what's extremely important here is that little things like that matter tremendously in terms of engagement and communication that you care, right? President Lambert showing up, which I know Dr. Book does all the time, but President Lambert showing up really communicated to us and to Black students that he cared. And I think that that's extremely important when we talk about having the conversations needed to really push things forward, particularly as it relates to marginalized and minoritized student life on campus. And I was so excited that I think I saw this logo, the BSU logo somewhere still, and I'm like, thank the Lord that you all still using that logo, because an iMedia student actually did that logo. She actually, I think she graduated, Jordan graduated undergrad, and then she went to the iMedia program. And she told me after we were using it so much, she was like, I should have charged you for it. And I was like, but at the time, that year, one of the things that was happening nationally was, those of you may not remember, but Mizzou actually had a huge nationally covered protest from a student who went on a hunger strike. The football team also went on strike regarding Black student life on campus, some incidences of bias. And, we wanted to be a part of that conversation. And so we really made sure that we were plugged into what was going on, right, and being responsive. And I think that that's what is extremely important as any organization or as any human being or individual who wants to impact change, is to be aware of what's going on, what is currently happening, not just at your institution, but also everywhere else. Because although we are here at Elon, we don't exist, we aren't isolated, we are impacted by the world around us. So this picture was in 2016, and if you notice, so I started college in 2012. So what I thought, anybody would think at the time is that you would finish in 4 years. All three of these individuals are BSU executive board members, and they were seniors at the time. We started at the same time. Everyone else is in their regalia. I am not. And that is because in 2016, literally on, I think, the first day of classes of the last semester, it may not have been the first day, but it was super close. We were in class for like 5 days. I was leaving a show. It was All's Well That Ends Well. It was out in Arts West. And like any student at 10 o'clock at night, I went to Cookout. I was trying to go to Cookout. And I was at a light, and I got slammed. Somebody slammed in the back of me so hard I actually hit my head on my steering wheel. And I was confused. I can remember this very vividly. The person who hit me got out of his car, came to my window and said, "Are you okay?" And I didn't respond, and then he took off running. And I kind of got my wits about me enough to call the police, and I think I called my mom. I don't know what order I did this in, but I called the police, I called my mom, and I called campus safety and police because I wanted to talk to the administrator on call. So for those of you that don't know, there's an administrator on call here. I live an hour away. I knew my mother could not get here, and I also knew that at the time I didn't have all my faculties together. And at the time, which Dr. Dooley, you had been here for a while at that point, I think, the administrator on call wasn't available or something. I said, well, I need to speak to the senior administrator on call because I'm in a car accident, and it just so happened to be Dr. Dooley. And Dr. Dooley met the ambulance at I got to the hospital. Dr. Dooley came and he sat with me until my mother got there. And to me, I was talking to my mom this morning because she was like, "I hope you do really well and don't embarrass me." And I was like, "I won't." But she mentioned to me how, as a parent, that type of support was amazing to her. That a senior level administrator of this institution would be willing to sit, and respond in that way to a student who is in need or in crisis was tremendous. So I will thank Dr. Dooley for that. And additionally, within the coming months, I really struggled to kind of bounce back academically. With a concussion, you kind of have to sit still. And as I told you all at the beginning, I am not that person. And my roommate, who was at the time, who was one of my closest friends, Cassidy, was like, "I'm gonna help you out. I just stay still, just don't do anything." And I was like, "No, I have to go to class. I can't get behind. I have to do this, I have to do that." And, because I felt like I was gonna get behind. And I really, I remember having a conversation with a professor. And this sounds really bad, because it was really bad. But the professor said to me, "I don't think that you have the brain capacity to pass my class. And so you should probably come back next semester." And that's a quote verbatim, is brain capacity. That professor is now retired. But that sort of told me, and that was senior seminar, that was the last class I needed. And I said, well, if that faculty member doesn't believe in my ability to be here, then I probably am not. It was kind of like this self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing. Like once someone who has the authority and the influence says you can't do it, then you may as well just not do it. But I remember being like, I have to come back again, and I have to spend money again, and have to take out more loans again, and it was just it was a really bad time for me. And then also, one of the things I know now is that graduation in 4 years is like this thing that we feel like we have to do. But the reality is a lot of people don't graduate in 4 years, right? And Elon is a little bit different because our 4-year graduation rate is really high. But if you look at other schools, there is a little bit more of a norm there. And so I think that being at Elon and also seeing all of my friends graduate really exacerbated the kind of depression of that, which I don't use the word depression lightly because that really was what I experienced. But the good thing about my super senior year, I call it my super senior year, is that I still was able to, do well and kind of get across the finish line. And I TA'd for a Disney leadership class. And this is a meme that one of my participants created because the evil queen and I had a wonderful time. She became one of my best friends. And so a student posted this on Facebook and I found it hilarious. We had a very good conversation. So support, this picture is actually from me visiting one of my friends, but I thought it was very poignant in the fact that support is a verb in that we always think about support in terms of what we receive from someone else, as opposed to internally us developing the capacity to support ourselves. And I spent that year really trying to be intentional about that, really trying to be, really trying to focus on what was next. So I graduated, and my family all came. It was really hot that day. And I got across the finish line. After I graduated, I moved back home and I napped for like 2 weeks. I was like, I just need to rest. And I was applying for jobs and I couldn't get any jobs. And so I always say that if a door is not opening for you, that door may not have been your door, right? We will all end up where we are meant to be. So the important thing to focus on is to just lean into life and just be on the journey, right? And so I woke up one day and I went downtown to the courthouse because I didn't have a job and I knew I wanted to go to law school at some point. And I went and found a judge that I used to intern for. And I said, can I intern for you for just a couple weeks until I find a job? And a couple weeks turned into like 3 months. I was very gracious of her. And I got a job in the Forsyth County Clerk's office. But I also had a part-time job at a local Boys and Girls Club. It was through that Boys and Girls Club that I met a sitting school board member at the time who was really nice to me. And she said, I love you. I remember when she first said that, I was like, lady, but she said, I think you should come and watch some school board meetings, because we talked a lot about the school system and all those things. She introduced me to a school board member at the time who was 85 years old. His name is Victor Johnson, and he also saw something in me, and he said, I think you should run for school board. I said, whoa, very nice to meet you. And he said, I'm 85, I don't want to do this anymore. I think you would be great at this. I said, that's not really something I anticipated doing right out of college. It was, just baffled me. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna lose. And he was like, you need to try this, you're gonna win. Well, I went down to the Board of Elections and I registered, did all the things, and I lost. And it's okay. But at the time I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I lost. But at the time I was like, okay, what do I do now? I need to do something. I have to have purpose. I'll go to law school. And so what I did was went to Elon Law. I had taken the LSAT like a year prior before I decided to run for the board, and Elon Law's application deadline was a little bit later, so I got in, thankfully. But at the end of my first year, about 9 days before final exams, my father had a stroke at the fire station that he worked at, which probably saved his life. And so a part of that meant that I had to leave law school and move back to Winston, and I did. And I got a job at the city of Winston-Salem, which is where I work now. And somewhere along the line, it's all been like a blur, but a vacancy opened up on the Board of Education, and I pursued that vacancy, and I got it. Actually, I remember Dr. Williams texted me, and he said, "Oh my gosh, you saw it on TV." It was like on WXI, and I was amazed. So I became the youngest school board member in the history of our school system. The reason why that's important is because there was no school board member at the time who had attended school in the 21st century. So if you think about the landscape, no, for real, if you think about the landscape of public education within the 21st century, that is problematic. And so, joining the board, I think I really was in a position to be able to add a new perspective. And this is my mom. I have to throw her in here. So this was it was in February 9th of 2021. I was appointed, and we as board members, we speak at graduations. We divide all the graduations up and we speak. And I still have my robe, so I wear that at every graduation. Because if I'm like, when else are you going to? I'm going to do it. I won again in November, so I have a full 4-year term now. And that's the swearing-in ceremony from a couple months ago. And then this is our current Board of Education, of which I am now vice chair, the youngest ever. And the important thing to remember here is that there were key periods during my experience as a student and also as a kind of grown adult where I was like, what am I gonna do? Who am I? What is my purpose, right? And everything that has happened hasn't necessarily been because I planned it all out. And I was a person with a plan. If you know me, I had 5 different plans, 5 different trajectories. I was like, I'm gonna go into higher ed or politics or this or that. Literally, it happened the way it needed to happen. And so my encouragement, what I would say to you is to lean into life, into your journey. Don't not have a plan, but open yourself up to the possibility that you may be redirected elsewhere. This is me currently at work. And if you see my face, I work in HR, that's why my face is like that. Every day is, but I am a big advocate. What I do every single day at my day job is I have to spend time convincing people why they have made the bad decision, right? I talk to supervisors and department heads all day, and I tell them why they don't need to do something, right? And what that requires is a whole lot of empathy and a whole lot of understanding and a willingness to communicate in a way that is going to best connect to that person, because they can choose not to listen if they would like to, because I'm not the boss of them, right? I just serve in a role. And so it's important as you go through your journey, whatever that is, to understand that you don't exist in a silo in the world. Every single individual has their own unique lived experience. And so therefore, if your desire is to connect, then it is incumbent on you to develop the skills to be able to make those connections. So this is Cassidy. And Cassidy is a 2016 graduate and one of my closest friends. And she's a communications professional. Relationships are extremely important, but not every relationship, right? In college, you develop lifelong friendships and connections with individuals. I put this picture of Cassidy and I in here because this is from last summer. This is literally from June of this past summer. We've been friends for 10 years. We became friends my first year. We went to some type of, I was trying to get signatures to be able to run for freshman class president, and I was being a little timid. And she snatched the list from me, and she was like, I'm gonna get the signatures because you're not, she was like, you don't really want this, I'm gonna just help you out. And she really pushed me to be better. And she is in part one of the reasons why I'm able to sit in the position I'm in now. So I encourage you all to really, really focus and hone in on your friendships. So I'm gonna do a plug real quick because last week I started a new podcast with some colleagues, some former colleagues of mine here who are also friends, right? Myself, along with Demetria Spear, who's a 2015 graduate, and Desiree Porter, who is also a 2015 graduate of Elon, have launched a new podcast called Black Toxicity. It is available everywhere that podcasts are available. Simone has listened to the first episode. She loves it. And I encourage you all to follow all those things. And so I'm going to close the same way I opened, which is by presenting these words to you, right? Revive, reclaim, rejoice. When you are in periods where you are low, be intentional about understanding that the low is temporary. Life is ebbs and flows. There are ups, there are downs. If there were not, if you didn't have the bad times, you wouldn't be able to really appreciate the good. You will revive. Reclaim. When I first saw the word, I thought about that congresswoman who was like, reclaiming my time, I forgot, Maxine Waters. And I think there are periods of time in life where we have to be really intentional about advocating for ourselves and sort of taking back things that we've lost, whether that be confidence, whether that be, our belief in self, anything, right? And then rejoice in our accomplishments. Rejoice in the fact, some people didn't really, I tell people all the time, we survived a pandemic. Well, we are still surviving actively a pandemic. And one that took people through really tough times. People lost their jobs, people's, parents had to move and go different places, and some of us had to do things that we would not normally ever think possible. That in and of itself is an accomplishment. So rejoice in the small achievements. And for the people who are like me, who sometimes have the imposter syndrome of I don't know how I got here, please just, ignore me, or people who can't take compliments. So Sylvia said something to me before I started talking and I was like, hey, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. But rejoice in those things, right? Because every single one of you here has the capacity to be fantastic and amazing. You're Elon students. That's what we do. Thank you so much.